Houston is a city of relentless heat and towering glass, but beneath the surface lies a 7-mile labyrinth of air-conditioned tunnels. David, a night shift maintenance worker, was used to the silence of the underground after the commuters went home. However, on a Tuesday night in August, he heard a sound that didn't belong, a low-frequency hum that vibrated the heavy steel doors and made the fluorescent lights flicker in a rhythmic, heartbeat-like pattern. While checking a water leak near the Main Street Square sector, David found a maintenance shaft that wasn't on his digital map. The air coming from the shaft didn't smell like recycled oxygen. It smelled of thick, stagnant swamp water and ancient, rotting wood. Driven by a sense of duty, he climbed down the rusted ladder, descending into a level of Houston that predated the skyscrapers above. At the bottom, David found himself in a flooded brick tunnel that looked like it belonged in the 1800s. The water was black and oily, reflecting his flashlight beam like a dark mirror. He realized he was standing directly beneath the Buffalo Bayou. Suddenly, he saw something floating. Thousands of old, handwritten letters, their ink bleeding into the water, forming dark clouds that looked like ghostly reaching hands. The hum grew louder, and David realized it wasn't a machine. It was the sound of thousands of voices whispering at once. It was the echo of the storms, the collective memory of every flood that had ever hit Houston. He heard the sound of rain hitting a tin roof, even though he was 30 feet underground, and the temperature began to drop rapidly despite the Texas summer above. In the distance, a tall figure emerged from the black water. It was draped in tattered, waterlogged rags that looked like old ship sails. This was the Bayou King, an urban legend told by the old-timers who worked the ship channel. Its face was a mesh of wet Spanish moss and jagged river stones, and its eyes were two glowing amber orbs that looked like alligator eyes. The black water in the tunnel began to rise at an impossible speed. David turned to climb back up the ladder, but the rungs had turned into soft, slippery mud. The walls of the tunnel were no longer brick. They were made of tightly packed, gray silt that was oozing out like liquid. He was being trapped in a prehistoric pocket of the Texas earth. A thick, black liquid began to seep from the ceiling. Crude oil, the lifeblood of Houston. But this oil was different. It was sentient. It moved across the ceiling like a swarm of insects, forming shapes of people who had worked the oil fields a century ago. They were pointing at David, their oily mouths opening in silent screams that vibrated through the water. David heard the distant sound of a massive foghorn, despite being miles from the port of Houston. A ghostly shadow of a steamship began to materialize through the tunnel walls, its hull grinding against the concrete. The ship was filled with the unclaimed, the workers who had built the city's foundations and were forgotten by time, their spirits tethered to the humid air.
Small, pale roots began to grow out of the concrete floor, wrapping around David's ankles. These weren't plant roots. They looked like human veins. They were trying to plug him into the city's underground network. He realized that Houston wasn't built on land. It was a floating city of glass held up by the spirits of the swamp below. The hum reached a deafening crescendo. David saw a giant, rusted iron heart pulsating in the center of the chamber, connected to the city's power grid by thick, pulsating vines. Every time the heart beat, the lights in the skyscrapers miles above would flicker. The heart was fueled not by electricity, but by the dread of the people living in the humid heat above. David felt his own skin becoming slick and dark, like the oil-covered water. His breath became heavy and humid, smelling of the bayou. He was losing his surface self. His thoughts were being replaced by the history of the land, the cattle drives, the oil booms, and the devastating hurricanes that had shaped the Texas coast. A man in a 1940s oil baron suit appeared, standing on top of the black water. He held a golden compass that spun wildly. He told David that the city above was just a lure to keep people here so the swamp could feed. The bayou always takes back what was stolen, the man whispered, his voice sounding like the crackling of a forest fire. The tunnel walls finally gave way, and a torrent of black bayou water rushed in. David was swept away, tumbling through a dark, liquid void filled with the debris of a century. Old cars, wooden furniture, and the bones of the city's past. He felt himself being woven into the very fabric of the underground, his body becoming a support beam for the tunnels. Back on the surface, David's co-workers found his flashlight and radio near the maintenance shaft. The radio was playing a recording of the 1900 Great Storm, even though there was no station broadcasting it. When they looked down the shaft, all they saw was a calm, shallow puddle of water that smelled faintly of Spanish moss. The next day, the heat in Houston reached 105 degrees. A new intern was walking through the downtown tunnels when he felt a cold breeze come from a vent. In the reflection of a shop window, he saw a man standing behind him, a man who looked like David, but his eyes were glowing amber like an alligator's. When the intern turned around, the hallway was empty, but a single, wet footprint made of black oil remained on the tile.